Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Mistress of the Damned. I am your Mistress Katrina. Hello. If you are new here, welcome. Glad to see you here. This is where I am reading through the enormous library of books that's behind me, sort of. Long story there. Anyways, it's constantly growing. It's a book hoard. That's what I do. I hoard books. Anyways, I am reviewing the books after I read them and sharing my thoughts and reviews right here on this channel. So if you like books and you're not sure what to read, hit that subscribe button, like and share my videos, leave me some recommendations in the comments. I'm always looking for new things to read, despite the enormous library of books behind me. This week's book, pardon me, is a modern classic, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. For the love of God, what is going on with Adobe? I don't have Adobe open. Whatever. Okay. This week's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, An Inquiry into Values by Robert M. Pirsig. This book joined my library when I was TDY with my day job to Colorado, and I picked it up at a local Barnes & Noble in the philosophy section, and then put it in my library because I don't actually buy books to read them. I just buy them to put them on my shelf, because that's what hoarders do. This is an object lesson to everybody out there who's like, oh, I love books. Yeah, me too. That's how I got this enormous library. But anyways, I bought it. It was like one of the first philosophy books I bought. And I think I was expecting more about motorcycles because, it's in the title. A little less philosophy, although I don't know why. Zen certainly is a system of philosophy. It's Eastern philosophy versus, the Socratic method, but still, it's philosophy. But that's, it is what it is. Here we go. This book is, it's autobiographical, all right? It's retelling a motorcycle trip that the author took with his son, and the narrator never actually says, yes, I am Robert Pirsig, but the events told in the story in the book happened to him, and so I don't think it's a stretch at all to say it's autobiographical. This is his life story. So Robert Pirsig was something of a boy genius. The book mentions at one point that the narrator had an IQ of 170, which is certainly above genius level. People who are super smart like that, they can encounter particular problems. The rest of us just can't relate to them because they're just so smart. They see life at such a different level that the problems they encounter are not necessarily unique, because that makes it sound like they're outside the human experience, but I think they encounter them at a different level than most people would. So the first bump that he apparently hit was he failed out of college at 15. Yeah, that's not exactly the normal American experience. Plenty of people fail out of college. Most of them do it when they're in their mid-20s. So he was a decade ahead of everybody else. But what caused him to fail out was that his mind got too entranced with the scientific method. So he'd get into describing hypotheses and scenarios, and at one point he realized that everything is a variable. Every variable can change the outcome, and that drove him down a well that he didn't know how to find his way out of, and that led to him failing out of college. Basically, too many options, right? And that is something that everybody can relate to. You stall out in life because you have too many options and you don't want to make a mistake, so you just don't do anything. And so there's lots of life lessons in this book if you look at them as they happen. After failing out of college, he joined the Army eventually, spent some time in Korea, I believe with the Army, where he was introduced to Eastern philosophy. Eventually, he returned to the States, where he returned to college in Minnesota, earning a bachelor's degree in philosophy, after which he spent 5 years in India, continuing studies with Eastern philosophies. Then in the late 1950s, he and his first wife had 2 sons, Chris and Ted. Chris is the one who took the famed motorcycle journey with him across country. For a few years, Robert Pirsig taught English at the Montana State College. In the book, this is kind of where the true obsession is born. He describes that he's prepping for one of his classes, or he's grading papers or something, and someone makes an offhand comment about teaching quality. And quality in the book is always with a capital Q. It's quality. And identifying what exactly quality is becomes an all-pervading obsession. It's Interspersed throughout his search for quality, we are introduced to multiple different philosophical thoughts, and the narrator seeks constantly to kind of bridge this gap between classical thought and romantic thought, and those are the terms he uses in the book. Classical thought being a very methodical, this is how things should be done, and kind of the technology side of life, the very specifics, with romantic thought being the art side of life. And he's not necessarily saying one is good or bad or one is better than the other. He's just identifying there are these two very distinct schools of thought, the classical and the romantic, and they don't always mesh. And this book kind of tries to bridge that gap between the art and technology. And all of these connections and bridges are built through motorcycle maintenance, which is kind of interesting to listen to, or to read through, when he talks about the specific steps that you have to take to make sure that your machine is functioning so that you can hop on it and go the next day. And he talks about friends of his who are more interested in just the romanticism behind jumping on a motorcycle and riding all day, and that sort of free spirit that comes with, riding the open highways, versus the classical maintenance, making sure that you understand how things work so that you aren't blindsided by trauma. And that was kind of an interesting dialogue. Dichotomy, dialogue, both. I think it's both. There's beauty described in connecting with the straight mechanics of a machine and the connections with life and nature inherent from riding a motorcycle versus riding in a car. You're ever so much closer to nature, because on some levels you are ever closer to death in a motorcycle. But motorcycles are not, I think I read somewhere once that doctors call them donation machines, because motorcycle versus car, the car's going to win, right? It's going to happen. So you are closer to life because you're closer to death when you're riding on a motorcycle versus driving in a car, especially modern cars. And this book was written in 1974. The motorcycle trip was taken in 1968. So the safety things they had in cars then are nowhere near what they have now, with all the airbags and the crush technologies and everything that's designed to keep people in cars safe. And those advances haven't necessarily come along with motorcycles, because the feel is so different. And the only thing that really can help, not necessarily keep you safe, but can help on a motorcycle is a helmet. And probably leathers, because if you slide on a motorcycle wearing leathers means you're going to scrape up your leather, not your skin. It's an important safety tip. I feel like I heard that from some of my friends who do in fact ride motorcycles, and kind of stuck with me right up here. Okay, so that was one tangent. The narrator describes basically when he's driving on this trip with his son, and it starts out with some friends too, but then in Montana the friends head back to, I believe, Minnesota is where they were living at the time, and he and his son continue on to the West Coast all the way. But he kind of describes how they stuck to back roads more than freeways, because it was a slower pace and you got to see more of the country on back roads versus traveling by freeway. And that's lets you see kind of how other people live. And people who live this more rural lifestyle are more connected with nature and with each other than people who are urban dwellers. And seeing the country by way of back roads and small town USA is a connecting force. It really is, especially because people in cities are in such a rush to get everywhere, and things are so much slower in the country, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't in any way, shape, or form imply that people who live in the country are slow thinkers or slow movers, but they do take the time to examine a situation before they make a decision, and that's a lot different from pace in an urban environment where you have to kind of make a decision, bam, now. While reading through these kind of life lessons, he calls them chautauquas. I'm not sure if I'm saying that one right. I actually had to look that word up. I'd never heard it before. From context in the book, I'm kind of assuming the narrator is referring to the more modern meaning, which is kind of an interfaith lecture or adult schooling, versus the original meaning of the word, which was an Iroquois word, meaning a bag tied in the middle or two moccasins tied together. Or maybe not. Maybe he did mean it kind of in the original sense of two bags tied together, because he's tying all these ideas together. Did I miss that? Maybe I missed the meaning. There is a reason there's a companion guide to this book called Guidebook to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Maybe I should read that one at some point too, to make sure that I catch all the symbolism that I'm quite certain I missed. You know what? None of that matters. They're life lessons. They're tied together. And these life lessons intersperse throughout the story of his life. And while he's obsessing over his search for quality, he decides to seek out a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago. Now, that happened in the early 1960s. And as a result of seeking that PhD and his search for quality, he kind of went into a depressive spiral that was bad enough he was eventually, both the narrator and Robert Pirsig, that's why I'm pretty sure this is autobiographical, they were forcibly committed into an insane asylum. And the 1960s insane asylums insane asylums are not happy places even today, but back then they had a lot more leeway for treatment that has certainly been discontinued in the interim. And the author himself, or at least the narrator in the book, was subjected to forcible electroshock therapy. I think he said 28 times in the book. That is a lot of currency to be going through your brain. EST is no longer, electroshock therapy is no longer acknowledged as a viable treatment for any form of mental health disturbance. But in the 60s, this was seen as a way to, boy, I don't know. I don't even know. I certainly haven't done a lot of research into psychology, but it was seen as a form of treatment that was highly valuable and viable and could help you to reconnect the parts of your brain that had disconnected. Instead, it seemed to create more of a gulf in the author. Throughout the book, you get the sense that prior to being committed, the narrator was not in charge of his life. And the person he says was in charge was Phaedrus. And he sees these kind of ghosts from his past, and he knows that it's Phaedrus talking to him. And the narrator's life is broken into these before and after times when Phaedrus was in charge before, and after when the narrator is just trying to get along. He's just trying to get along in life and lead a normal life. But in the intro to this edition, Pirsig says flat out that Phaedrus sees the narrator as a sellout. Someone who just wants to fit in and get along is selling out his own ideals. And that builds tension, that concept of selling out. And he does a remarkable job building it, especially because most of the book is a monologue. It's all in his head. The trip isn't. The trip's very much there, and his son is kind of along for the ride, but it's this tension that builds and builds and builds throughout the book between who he was, which was Phaedrus, and who he is meant to be, which is also Phaedrus, but Phaedrus has been kind of locked behind these doors psychologically by the forcible treatment, the forced commitment to the insane asylum, and then the forced electroshock therapy. And you kind of get the sense that the sanity the narrator currently inhabits is actually the illusion. That prior to being committed for being insane, he was fully sane. And the electroshock therapy forced him into insanity, into this false sense of sanity that everybody inhabits in being nice to each other. It's really well done. God, I hope I got all this. I really feel like I do need to read that guidebook now and make sure that I'm not missing any of the points. And maybe I am. Maybe I'm horribly off. But anyways, and it's like a 400-page book, and it builds until like the last 10 pages, where the tension breaks because Chris is crying over his lost father, who was Phaedrus, and the man left behind, who's the narrator. And that seeing his son break down like that kind of pulls Phaedrus back to the front. It's remarkable. I'm quite sure that I missed a lot of like deeply intellectual and intrinsically philosophical thought behind the symbolism of this book. Just kind of flew past me. I mean, I think I'm smarter than average. It's been a while since I had an IQ test, but I am not 170. I know that. So I'm not that smart. And the guidebook that I mentioned a couple of times now is written by a couple of PhDs in conjunction with Chris Pirsig. So that tells me that yes, I'm pretty sure I missed something. Pretty sure I need to go back and revisit it. Probably not going to happen this year. I already have my reading list set out for the year, but maybe next year we'll make that happen. This book is beautifully written. It pulls at the heartstrings, and I caught a good portion of the deep thinking, at least I think I did, even without an IQ of 170. But it's beautiful, and I'm sure I'll reread it at some point with the guidebook to make sure I don't miss anything else. And that's it for this week. It was it was a very lovely, oh my God, I am such a weakling, such a pussy. Fucking, I cry over everything. Jesus Christ. Anyways, that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Share my video far and wide. If you need something to read that will get you thinking, I definitely recommend Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Thank you for watching. Next week we're going to be delving into John Adams, who is my favorite president, or at least my favorite founding fathers. I can't say he's my favorite president until I've read all of them, but he is my favorite founding father and always has been, for a variety of reasons we'll go into next week. Thank you for watching. Bye.